Okay. Okay. I think we'll start. Well, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Phil Riris to our talk series. I've known Phil for many, many years. I probably still owe Phil a coffee. And Phil's always been doing a lot of interesting work that combines very practical hands-on experiences in the Orinoco River area with very nice statistical analysis and plots and things. So I guess with that, take it away.
All right, thanks very much, Peter, and thank you to University of York at large for the invitation to talk today. I'm going to talk to you about some recent results that we have coming out of the Orinoco River, centered on the middle and upper Orinoco transition. I'll go into where exactly we'll work in just a second. That I'm quite excited to share with you. So I'm presenting this today with my colleagues at UCL and Universidad de los Andes, Jose Oliver and Natalia Losada, respectively, without whom this work wouldn't have been possible. So thank you greatly to my co-authors as well. So I'm going to go through some of our field work in the region. I'm going to talk about some of the qualities of the record and then focus on these quite outstanding, in my opinion, rock art sites that we have had the great fortune of recording, and into some of the analysis that we've done on them. So the region that we're talking about is the so-called Orinoco interaction sphere. This is an area of northern South America, as the name implies, centered on the Orinoco River. And geographically, this area is located smack bang in the middle of the area comprised by the Guiana Highlands, Colombian Amazonia, the Upper Negro to the south of the region, so one of the main tributaries of the Amazon River, and then to the north, if you like, the Caribbean as well, which we can include in this. The area has an uninterrupted human presence since at least the deglacial and quite possibly earlier. So it's a long sequence of occupation, and this is in some cases associated to the rock art record, and I'll go into this in just a little bit. And it's been noted as a particular hotspot of cultural diversity, and not just that, rock art researchers have called it a hotspot within a hotspot of rock art diversity and quality. Some of the outstanding sites, what we term monumental sites, and I'll define this a bit more clearly in just a bit, are all found within this area. So our study area here in the middle Orinoco in the center, but also there are geoglyphs to the north in the Rueda del Indio in Venezuela, and then famous sites of Chiribiquete and La Lendosa, as well as sites along the river Caquetá to the south and southwest. So it's an exciting place to work for rock art studies. It's an exciting place to work in general because it is hugely culturally diverse in terms of its indigenous societies. So this is an ethno-linguistic map of the region. These are all the language families that are found in the region, taking from Love Erickson's PhD thesis, trying to map this out. Just to say that each of these colors on here are equivalent to not an English or a Welsh or a French language. Each of these colors is equivalent to an Indo-European or a Nilotic or a Sino-Tibetan language. These are language families we're talking about. There's the highest density of language families anywhere in the world outside of the highlands of Papua New Guinea, and the highest density in the world of language isolates. So there's a really, really complex indigenous and deep indigenous history of the region that we're very fortunate to be able to draw on for our work. I'll just briefly explain something about hello. Sorry, I thought somebody was asking me a question.
I think somebody's not muted in the audience.
All right, no worries. Just to say something briefly about our data collection, we've been doing field work here since 2015, up until pretty much the pandemic. We're hoping to go back in January 2023, so a fair gap, but we're sort of struggling through it. In this time, we've been able to record 154 rock art sites, 14 of which are large scale or monumental sites. But these include sites that we've visited personally, individually, but also ones that we've been able to gather from a really extensive literature review that's been carried out jointly between the three of us. We have really good record of both engravings, petroglyphs, and paintings, or pictographs. I prefer engravings and paintings as a sort of terminology, but overall, when you sort of do go through and do counts of the motifs in these sites, we end up with thousands and thousands of individual motifs spread across sort of 70, 80 different types. Most of these motifs are contained within large sites, these large scale sites. They contain over 70% of the total number of motifs, despite only being 14 sites. So, and because of this, they're unusually diverse and interesting for that reason. Engravings and paintings tend to be segregated from one another. Engravings are in open air, paintings tend to be in rock shelters or overhangs, which, you know, it could be due to their role or function, but obviously could also be due to site toponymy. Painting washes away in this very quite wet seasonal environment. But we do have open air. We do have some open air paintings as well. So there's a question mark hanging over that we need more research to work that particular problem out. And only a single site has been dated. There's one site called Cerro Gavilan, which I'll show you in just a bit, which has an occupation sequence spanning basically the whole Holocene. The earliest date, I think, is 9,300 calibrated years before present. And ochre is associated to the very earliest. So ochre used to paint the paintings in this rock shelter is associated to the very earliest human occupations of this rock shelter. So it's a really long-term record. That being said, we do have parallels between archaeology and rock art in much later material culture as well. So the pot there, one of the few intact pots we have for the region, this was collected from a funerary rock shelter, which has paintings on it. It has a snake, zigzagging snake decoration with a spiral tail and horns on it. This is paralleled in a bunch of sites. The closest one of which is Cerro Palomason, which is sort of figuratively around the corner from it. And you know, this petroglyph is up on a rock face, comparatively close by to where this pot was found. Similarly, we have this little triangular face thing with two little Princess Leia donut shapes on the side of its head. We find it across the region, so it's in this Araucanoid style sherd painted decoration, and it's in several rock art sites as well. This one is affectionately known as the Rei de Atures. So the region is the Atures Rapids, and it's the king of the Atures Rapids. And it features in it's a famous one. It features in local tourist literature and logos and stuff. And Araucanoid pottery is relatively late. It's one of the last pottery styles you get in the region. So we need to juxtapose this with rock shelters in which we have dates that say 9,000 calibrated years before present. So just to make you aware of that. I also want to contrast the kinds of sites that we're talking about. Obviously today I'm talking about the monumental sites, but really there's a whole range of different ways of apprehending and experiencing rock art in our study area, in the middle and upper Orinoco. These range from sites that you need to literally get down on your hands and knees and crawl into in order to see anything at all. This cave in the Casuaritos on the Colombian side of the Orinoco, it's really hard to photograph these, as you can imagine. Contrast this with a different part of the same area of Eastern Colombia. There are these huge engravings up on a hillside. These are that little four-legged thing labeled 17 is about 5-6 meters tall. That engraving, obviously the human-ish figures, these are probably people in ceremonial dress. They are 10 meters tall, individual engravings. And you can see these from very, very far away, at least half a kilometer, if not further. So there's quite a different range of ways of experiencing and seeing the rock art. This is, of course, related to the temporality of the landscape itself. So this is a picture of the Atures Rapids during what they call winter, but locally is called winter, but what we would consider the rainy season. So this is one of our field sites here in the background. This large island we excavated here for reasons unrelated to the rock art. But during winter, this is what it looks like, and then in summer, this is pretty much the same view of the same area of the rapids, where terrain is much more exposed. You can actually walk in dry years. So this is 2016 during an El Nino year. You can actually walk from Colombia to Venezuela across the river. You have to do some jumping, but it's fully possible. And obviously, when there's rock art on these boulders that ring these islands, that has an impact on how visible the rock art is. So these are the same engravings. So the top right there is the same boulder as the bottom there. So there's this to take into account as well. In fact, some of the engravings we were able to record in 2016 hadn't been visible for decades because the river was so low in that particular El Nino year. So that's all I'll say about the qualities of the record, if you like. I'll go on to describing some of the sites themselves. So I want to draw a distinction between, so within the umbrella term of large sites, I want to draw a distinction between dense sites. For example, Cerro Gavilan here. This is the one that's been dated to the early Holocene and has a long occupational sequence pretty much until the present. Just to show you an alternative view of this site, I want to distinguish between this kind of site and the kind of large monumental sites that I'll go into in more detail in just a minute. So interesting thing about this, there's lots and lots of this hill is, I mean, it is a hill, and the word hill cerro means hill. This site rather is located some way away from the actual Orinoco River, but it has lots and lots of fish in it, lots of different types of fauna, jaguars, potentially tapirs. Interestingly, despite being a nesting ground for scarlet macaws, macaws aren't represented in the rock art, but there you go. Hugely diverse, huge diversity in terms of the types of motifs, the modes of production of motifs. So the red ochre predominates, but there's also white in isolation, yellow ochre, red ochre in isolation. And there's probably a chronological element to this. There's been some phasing done of this and of using these sites, these types of sites as a key to what came first, what came later, and it seems plausible that there's at least 6 or 7 different phases of rock art production over time. The final of which contains motifs like churches and missionaries, so presumably quite late in those cases. But also really strange stuff like down here there's a probable scorpion. I thought I had a picture of the jaguar, but I don't seem to have included that. But so these are the dense sites, the ones that contain hundreds and hundreds of individual motifs spread across 1 or 2 panels. By way of contrast, I want to show you some monumental sites. So this is the same site I just showed you here. In aerial perspective, and if you just look very, very closely, that's me for scale, and the square there is a single motif. That is one single motif in the red box. So it's about 3 meters by 4 meters, 12 meters square. It's a very, very large individual engraving, and it's not just an outline. They've recessed the whole rock surface down in order to make this. That's what it looks like when you sort of produce an enhanced image overlay. The biggest one there is the one in the red box, and there are several more. And there are other sites of a similar scale. So Cerro Grulla down there at the bottom left. There's another zigzagged snake engraving that is about, I think that one's about 20 meters long. Similarly, Cerro Casuarito, you can see one of our indigenous collaborators for scale. He's standing on the head of the snake. So that one's also about 25 meters long. So this is clearly something quite different in terms of the dimensions that really drew our attention about to this record, and it struck us as something that was worth investigating more systematically. So we did exactly that. We did more field work to try and delineate the extent to which this is a particularly upper middle Orinoco tradition of rock art production, because as it turns out, there are quite a few of these sites from recorded in the region. So up here at the north, this is oh god, the name has escaped me. So there's a town on the Colombian side up here at the confluence of the Meta River with the Orinoco. Down here, the Atures Rapids, where I've shown you most of the sites so far. So this monumental site is in the Atures Rapids, and then we've also succeeded in going slightly further south towards the Maipures Rapids, and recorded other sites of a similar scale. As far south as Caño Grulla, which I just showed you, the one that's the vertical one that's about 21 meters long. And this sort of zigzagging shape, the snake motif, whether vertical or horizontal, seems to be repeated throughout. It's a sort of a leitmotif, pun not intended, of monumental rock art, which to us seemed quite interesting based on what we know about ethnographies of the region. Just to briefly say, this one, number 8, Cerro Pirariame, is this is an old sketch. This is one that we encountered in our literature review, and it doesn't have a scale, but it's described as being up on a hillside and being quite large. So we're relatively confident that it's of similar dimensions to these. So the shortest one's about 21 meters, the longest one sort of 40 plus meters. These are very, very large engravings. So there's just to show you a couple more. So these have been produced just by, as you can see, the native rock, if you like, these granite inselbergs are not actually black. The black is the black color is a patina produced by cyanobacteria living on the surface of it's a bit like a lichen. It's a bit like a bacterial mat. And if you abrade this even slightly, it shows the natural rock color underneath, which is much lighter. And so obviously we've enhanced these images, but it does really make them quite visible from a fair distance without too much effort. Obviously, it's a bit of an effort to climb up to these sites and do the work, but the process of revealing what's beneath the patina is quite straightforward. And this gives you a sense of the range of sizes and the kinds of other motifs that co-occur with the snakes, human figures, animal figures, a few geometric motifs which are repeated elsewhere. The centipedes also appear alongside them. So quite interesting, really, what you can see. So that's the nature of the record itself. I'll go briefly into the symbology of snakes, of giant snakes, particularly boas and anacondas in indigenous cosmologies. So across Northern South America, the significance of serpents and giant snakes appears to cut across all of the ethnic and linguistic boundaries that we know about. So they feature repeatedly in creation myths. They're often charged with potentially dangerous generative, by that we mean sort of sexual reproduction, potentially dangerous force. So one of the local indigenous groups, some of whom we had the pleasure of working with, are called the Piaroa. Piaroa creation myths recount how there was a primordial power struggle between their culture hero called Wahari, in his aspect as a tapir, and the anaconda, the evil anaconda Kwemoi, as the archetype of sort of hostile kin relations. So the Piaroa are really preoccupied with maintaining peaceful kin relations, and this sort of struggle is personified by this myth. In fact, the wife of Wahari, who is the daughter of Kwemoi, the Boa, is responsible for the creation of rock art through the Orinoco during her exile, following inappropriate behavior, let's say, in the face of societal expectations. There are also myths describing the slaying of giant serpents. One of the principal dances performed during their sort of annual ritual cycle imitates the movement of anacondas, of giant snakes. So it sort of really permeates the mythology of the region and the art. So these are Tucano artworks painted. Well, this is in a sketchbook, but this zigzagging quadrangular pattern is said to represent a boa, and then obviously boas painted directly on a Tucano. So this is a completely different indigenous group, painted directly on one of the sides of their houses. So snakes come up again and again. In Arawak myth, serpents are thought to have emerged from the headwaters of the world's rivers before actually traveling down the rivers, and in the process creating them, sort of defining them as a force in this world, including waterways in the broadest metaphorical sense, like the Milky Way. So the Milky Way is considered to be one of the world's rivers as well, in one of the sky rivers in Arawak myth. So and then humans followed them on these rivers. So serpents are metaphorically also considered as a type of canoe. In other words, they're containers of people, and therefore an analog for reproductive power. It's all very, the ethnographies are all very complicated, and metaphor builds on top of metaphor, but the essential idea is that serpents are creators as much as they are enemies in some societies. So through these myths, Arawak-speaking groups tie their origins to the emergence, the travels, the resting places of these ancestral serpent canoes, these hybrid beings, which being able to name these places, knowing where these places are in the landscape, serves to distinguish kin from non-kin, so that the roles played by serpents really highlights their importance to how indigenous peoples related to their environments, in particular the reproduction of society and the appropriation of landscapes through these migratory voyages in which successive villages are founded downstream, something that we see archaeologically as well. So bearing this in mind, we thought that the rendition of gigantic snakes should be understood in the context of these qualities. Of course, we have to acknowledge that any individual motif probably doesn't have a single function or meaning, but it is worth saying that the location, which locations are chosen to bear rock art is likely to strongly inform its role. And so we approach this question using geospatial modeling to measure what Mark Gillings calls the visual affordances of these sites against the backdrop of the broader Orinoco landscape. So we wanted to identify where in the landscape these sites could be seen from individually to detect any commonalities between the gigantic snake panels, and to map how they're positioned in relation to one another. So we used a method called affordance viewshed analysis. This is sort of, if you like, the inverse of a traditional viewshed analysis. So a viewshed quantifies what you can see from a point in the landscape. Affordance viewshed is the inverse. It's how much of the landscape can you see a given point from. And so we did this for the sample of monumental snakes that we had personally visited. So so the eagle-eyed among you may notice that two of them are missing. Cañogruya and Seropirariame are missing. We haven't personally been able to go there and verify their locations, and as such we excluded them from this analysis. But the one centered on the Atures Rapids, and then in the box in the bottom left there, in the Maipures Rapids, we do have good location data for, and so this is what we performed the analysis on. Just briefly, so these circular histograms show the orientations of the observers. So what direction are the observers facing when they're looking at the gigantic snakes? And then the red dashed lines are the facing of the actual snake on the rock face. So most observers, to summarize this, is quite complex results. Observers tend to be located either on the river itself or on the banks of the river. In terms of landscape distribution, the snakes tend to be located between major settlement sites rather than sort of next to them or associated to them. The major settlement sites that we encountered in our archaeological fieldwork are on the borderlands between these sort of visual catchments of the gigantic snakes. And in general, there's quite high what we call visual reciprocity between the snakes and the observer. So when you see the snake can see you, if you like. The exceptions appear to be Maipures, where the facing of the snake might put us into some extent Pintado, which is this one here in Venezuela, where the observers can see the snake without it necessarily being facing it directly, if you like. You can see it from angles that don't include the sort of face-on angle, but the other ones are quite sort of face-on. And Casuarito as well is a weird one, but that's probably related to the fact that it's located in this valley here, this sort of gap between granite inselbergs, and so it's mainly visible from within here, but it faces outwards towards the river. So a bit of a weird one in that regard. Just to share with you some concluding thoughts from this, because I realize I'm running out of time. This is essentially, locations of the gigantic snakes are not coincidental. They are definitely defined by cultural perceptions of the environment, and we argue that rock art is really central to understanding how indigenous people appropriated the landscapes of the Middle and Upper Orinoco. In this regard, there is ample ethnographic evidence to the effect that giant snakes were active social agents. They're not rock art in general is not it's not art in the sense that we think of it, going to the National Portrait Gallery and seeing a nice painting. These are active social agents. They're often dangerous to approach. You need to behave in certain ways in relation to them. You can't just go and look at rock art. Something bad might happen. There are ways of relating to rock art. Giant snakes included among that dictates your behavior around them, and that may be part of what Stephen Hugh Jones has called a multi-centric mythscape, related to this idea of repeated foundational myths as you travel down the repetition of foundational myths as you travel down the river. So cosmological concepts and narratives are inscribed and re-inscribed into the landscape to mark common understandings of how the world lived in by humans was founded and structured by supernatural and suprahuman agencies. So rock art production clearly merited the considerable effort required to reach these cliff faces, as well as the investment in time and labor to produce them, and that's because they were key to defining the world that they lived in. And just to say, just finally, the sort of the headline grabbing thing, these are quite possibly, and I'm very, very happy to be corrected on it, these are quite possibly the largest individual engravings in the world. I am not certain I have ever personally heard of, and believe me, I've looked, of any individual engravings that are larger than this, sort of larger than 40 meters long, 3 meters high. There are panels of rock art around the world that are very large. But they're composed of individual motifs, sort of mosaic together or spread around. Individual engravings, I'm not sure there's anything like this. Obviously, the geoglyphs of Nazca come to mind, but they are geoglyphs. They're excavated into the ground. This is on the rock, like a petroglyph, which is a key distinction, I think. So that's all from me. Thank you again to the organizers. Sorry for the whistle-stop tour nature of that, but it was a lot of ground to cover. I'm happy to field any questions. And just to say, none of this would have been possible without the keen and enthusiastic collaboration of our Indigenous partners, who were invaluable to us and very hospitable. So thank you.
That was super cool. Thank you, Phil. Questions? Lots of questions.
I don't know, can you hear me from there?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Well, I was just intrigued, given the size of the engravings, did you incorporate an element of like a distance cutoff in terms of how far they'd be visible from? Obviously, I know there's a lot of muddying elements in terms of visibility, but when you constructed your visibility analysis, did you incorporate that, or were they all fairly close catchments, if you see what I mean? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, so in this case, in the actual analysis, we employed a cutoff of just shy of 7 kilometers. So this is sort of standard practice in this kind of analysis. It's about the distance from which you can reliably spot objects of this size. That being said, there is obviously you can't see the individual engravings. I mean, we know this from our field observations. You can't see the snake engravings from more. They don't resolve until about within 500, 600, 700 meters, less than a kilometer, so less than a sixth of these actual visual catchments. That being said, the hills themselves are visible from very far away. I kind of glossed over this a little bit, but the environment itself, let's see if it's apparent in the yeah, so the environment itself is a savanna. It's quite flat. Those hills in the background are not the norm, and this isn't the best photo to show you because trust me, overall it's very, very flat, and anything that rises above sort of 10, 15, 20 meters above the surrounding landscape is visible from very far away. So there is ground to suggest, I think, that people would know where the gigantic snakes are located, and even if they couldn't see them as such, they would act as sort of visual reference points in the landscape. They would be known about and referred to, say, if you were traveling on the river or walking along its banks. And so that to us justified using these much larger catchments.
Thank you.
Cool. Someone else had a question. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that there were multiple periods of phasing. I was just wondering if the snakes were appearing in one phase, or if you could tell the difference between phases. I guess my question overall is, were all these snakes created at one time, or were they kind of displaced throughout time?
Yeah, I would love to know that. I really would love to know that. So interestingly, elsewhere in other sites, not in the Middle Orinoco, but like stylistically very similar to what we see in the Middle Orinoco. Snakes appear in the painted rock art, but they don't appear in the painted rock art in our study area. And so the phasings that I mentioned are based only on the painted rock art. So we don't even have a relative chronology for the engravings. We only have a relative chronology for the painted rock art. And as we don't have snakes in the Middle Orinoco, it becomes a bit complicated to sort of say definitively when in the sequence they were created. My gut feeling is that they're relatively late. I would say the last 1,000 years, 2,000 years at a push. That is a long time window, admittedly, but in the context of sort of 10,000 years plus, it is relatively late. There's something else I wanted to say. I rambled too much. I lost it. Yeah, but my feeling is that they're quite late. Oh yeah, now I remember. This pot with the snake on it, with the applique snake on it, is the latest ceramic style. So Araucinoid is the second latest. This is Vaioid. This is the latest style, and it goes into the colonial period. So post 1500, to give you an idea.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat, but I'm going to assert because it's more on the topic of what you were talking about. Is there any commonality between the representations? You talked about a leitmotif that you were able to observe earlier, but do you get any sense of transmission going on with these snakes and with any of the depictions? I mean, are there ways of doing certain elements that you think are unusual but common to all of them, or unique to one area?
Some very broad scale patterns in that regard. Let's go back to the sliding question. Some very broad scale patterns. I mean, there's so in the Maypures Rapids and south, they're vertical. So Caño Maypures, Cerro Pirayaame, they're vertical. North of it, they're horizontal. I don't know what the significance, if any, of that is, but it's one that we picked up on. They are all horned snakes, apart from Pirayaame, and this is a very old sketch, and the source is dubious anyway. It's an practically an antiquarian account of Orinoco rock art. So, accepting that one, they all have horns. They all face the river. I mean, there is that to be said. But in terms of production, we haven't really looked into that, in part because they're so inaccessible. We haven't been able to collect systematic data on how they were produced. But yeah, I couldn't say in all honesty what there are, if any, commonalities in the transmission of knowledge of how they were produced. We don't have that data, I'm afraid.
Amelia is asking in the chat, were there any other animals of significance you observed in the rock art, such as cats?
Yeah, so the thing that we tend to see in the rock art, and I'm talking broadly now in Northern South America as a whole, is that it tends to be taboo animals. So they're animals of let's say ritual or shamanic significance. They're not. So, for example, it's very common for tapir to be taboo. You don't hunt tapir. You don't eat tapir. It's a taboo animal. It's not a food animal, and they are repeated quite often. Actually, they appear quite a lot. There's also, if not big cats themselves, then motifs that are reminiscent of big cats. So think dots on their body. Think the camouflage of jaguars. That's quite common. And again, that holds shamanic significance, as do vultures or eagles. We see vultures and eagles quite a lot. They are not, the things being represented aren't what people are necessarily eating or hunting. It's things that hold I mean, I know this is such a cliche, but it's things that hold significance in ritual contexts for the indigenous societies, and we know this because there are excellent ethnographies describing the rituals and the roles that animals have in them, or people transforming into animals or taking on their qualities in order to affect certain things in the world. Shamans, essentially. It's ritual. I think it tends to be ritual. The exception would be fish. If there isn't a big exception to this, it's fish. The fish being depicted are eaten, and in quite abundance as well.
Is there, just for my own ignorance, is there a fish on this slide?
Not on this slide, no. Here, there's these are fishes. These are the panel of the fishes, but there's also a tapir down here, a probable tapir, and then rows of fishes. Probable river dolphin, maybe a river dolphin, and somewhere else on this. Oh yeah, the jaguar face is up here. It's not a great angle on it, but there is a jaguar. Actually, I may have another slide. I do have additional stuff for just this occasion. Sorry, I've been holding it back. There we go. There's
That's really cool.
So there we go. Bonus content.
Kalina's question.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to express my disappointment that this presentation wasn't called Snakes on the Brain. But secondly, I'm sure you've heard that before, but secondly, can you just tell us, it's fantastic, it's really amazing, and the amount of data is great. Can you just tell us a little bit about the kind of future trajectory of this research? What can we anticipate coming out of this?
So in terms of the future, what we're looking to do with this is really try and more systematically connect it to the inhabitation and the use of the landscape. So we're continuing, as I said, we're continuing field work out there, and what we're really doing is, I mean, not just targeting archaeological sites, but also speaking. So on the Colombian side of the Middle Orinoco, there is a national park. And the stewards of that park are indigenous. They're Arawak-speaking indigenous people, and we have quite good contact with them. And we want to involve them more in the sort of co-creation of knowledge in this context to sort of, I mean, essentially broadcast to the world how important sites like this are for the preservation and maintenance of national parks. There is, to cut through a very long and often quite intense debate in conservation ecology, there's a tendency for conservation ecologists to see the target for conservation to be a pre-human world, a world in which there were no humans, and it's a pristine rainforest, and we can all live happily away from that. That is not the case. Tropical forests in the Americas have been lived in and modified and been made home by indigenous people for 10,000 years plus, as I said, and helping people, and by people I mean the decision makers and policy makers that decide what indigenous people are allowed to do in their very own territories, helping them see that actually humans are an integral part of this landscape. One of the ways that we can make this message clear is through evidence like this. So the more we can date the use of rock shelters, the use of archaeological sites associated to rock shelters, the more we're able to argue for the preservation of indigenous rights, essentially, and the right of indigenous people to manage their own worlds. So that's the sort of pie in the sky goal, if you like, and I hope we can start making some headway.
Thank you.
Cool. I think that's it.
All right. Well, thanks again for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to share.
Yeah, no, it's cool. You have to come back again, maybe in person next time.
I would love that.
Then we can go to the pub.
Yeah, Yeah, I get to go have lunch on my own now.
Lunch
Sorry.
on your own. Okay, all right.
Cool.
See you
All
later.
right. Thank you very much. Bye.